I'm Jonna Till Johnson, CEO of Nemertes, here with my co-host, John Burke.
CTO of Nemertes.
And we are psyched to have Dale Skeen, founder and CTO of Vitria, and Charlotte Patrick, independent analyst, joining us on the show today to talk about automation and AI. And Charlotte, I know you've done a lot of work in this space and done a lot of research, and the objective of your research was to understand how telcos are planning to enable the delivery of level 4 and level 5 network autonomy. What does that even mean? Like, what is level 4 and level 5 network autonomy, and where do the phrases come from, and what do they imply?
Yeah, for sure. So it means the beginning of the hard work, essentially. So level 4 in the TM Forum autonomous network model is a highly autonomous network, which is about making decisions largely independently. And then level 5 is the fully autonomous network. So theoretically, complete self-management, no human intervention. So in the last year, one of the things that's happened in the model is that there's a rising up of the topic of agents. And so we've seen level 4 divided into 2, I think, because there's quite a long time frame to get this up and working. So you've got level 4A, which is the closed loop automation with a domain by a more simple agent system. And then level 4B, which is a more complex scenario using a multi-agent system.
So the difference between level 4A and level 4B is level 4A, simple agent, level 4B, multi-agent. Can you clarify the distinction between both level 4s and level 5?
Yeah, so level 4A, a simple agent. So we are talking about probably a large language model at the top of a hierarchy. It is able to understand what a human wants and turn it into a series of simple actions, and it is able to make a series of simple decisions about what tools to use to enable those automations. And then level 4B, so a multi-agent system. There you begin to give autonomy and intelligence to individual agents, and you begin to open up a theoretical whole realm of pain. It is quite tricky. And then level 5, well, I think by then you're starting to look at the more complex automations that didn't get done first time round. So relatively simple to do a single domain automation, much more difficult to do a cross-domain automation or something that requires, business through to service, through to the network and so forth. So, you're just becoming, who knows where we'll get to with level 5.
And you talk in several places in the research you've put out and in discussions about closed loop automations. Can you shed some light on that? Because I know we're going to come back to that again and again.
Yeah, so particularly when we're talking about self-healing networks, there are just endless closed loops. So any time that something does something, that an agent completes an action, there is a closed loop to understand how it went and to improve the intelligence. But it could also be a closed loop between agents. So one agent does something and the other agent looks to see how that does and starts that loop. And then, of course, you get multiple closed loops up and down stacks and up and down different areas. So it is just a multitude of looking to see what happens and then saying, okay, that's fine, or no, we need to improve.
Thank you. And I think that is a huge thing for people to keep in mind, because AIs currently aren't great at understanding that the world of the future is different from the world of the past, and that, their actions can change the world of the future. So the calling out of the need to close that loop, hugely important. So where are we starting to see some of these things happening out there in the world of real telcos doing real telco networking?
So things most AI mostly kicked off, or at least machine learning mostly kicked off in the assurance space, in trouble management. You have problems there which are important and high value. But they're not super difficult. We are not, the network is not going to collapse if a closed loop doesn't work or an agent doesn't do what they're going to do. So that is the place where you see most things happening. And of course, then we are talking about self-healing as part of today, and probably the most difficult of the automations to do. So we're talking about many closed loops and many domains, and just a lot of subtle issues that need to be fixed. So I'm expecting to see, and indeed we are seeing, especially out in China, the first examples of agent systems working, simple agent systems working in assurance and trouble management.
And the challenge with self-healing, as you kind of spelled out, I mean, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking, yes, this is going to be hard, but I think what I'm hearing you say is the problem is you have to have perfect or near perfect root cause analysis, which is hard enough. And then you have to figure out what sequence of actions to take in what order to do the self-healing, as opposed to just, hey, I know what the problem is and here's a way to fix it, because the problem may not be the problem. The problem may be a second, third, fourth order occurrence from the actual problem.
Absolutely. And Dale, my co-person on this discussion today, that's his area, because the data side of this is just monumentally difficult.
Yes, absolutely. So we're an AI ops vendor, and the purpose of AI ops is to troubleshoot, diagnose, and help automate, fixing our problems. And so you can take an example of one of those closed loop that Charlotte was talking about. Let's say that you get a signal that says a cell tower is isolated. Now, you don't know if it's down or if there's a fiber cut somewhere. So then you monitor the situation to see if you can talk to other cell towers. You then look at the entire whole situation. You diagnose, you predict the root cause, or you have what we call probable root cause. And then you apply a recommended fix. You do a recommended fix recommendation for that. Now, if there are probably somewhat automations for this already in place. And so there's these libraries of automation, some simple, some more complex. So you call one of those. And if the automation fixes the problem, then you have detected the right problem, made the right recommendation, had the right root cause, and you had the right fix. That becomes now a closed loop feedback. You record that, you take that information, and you feed it back into the AI, which reinforces what they've already learned. If they make the wrong decision, then they go back and they will then adjust the algorithms.
So I have a quick question on that. It sounds so beautiful when you lay it out that way, and beautifully neat. But
Yeah.
all I'm thinking is, how long do you wait before you know it was the right thing to do? Because sometimes you'll do something, it'll the system will seem to resolve the problem, and then something will bubble up somewhere else because it wasn't actually the right fix. So
Yeah.
How does time factor into that?
Well, time is a very important factor into that. The first thing you do is that when you you automate the fix, usually you verify if you can. So, for example, you ping the cell tower to see if you can now talk to it. Obviously, if you can't talk to it, then you applied the wrong fix. You go back to diagnosis, and then you try to determine a different root cause for that. So that's one aspect of it.
I had a second follow-up question on there. And in addition to having to decide how long to wait before you look for the effect that you're hoping to take place and deciding whether it happened or not, is there any way for these systems currently to differentiate between irreversible actions and actions that they can back out of?
Well, I think typically today you put a human in the loop when there's irreversible actions. So the AI itself may not know if the action is irreversible or not, but typically there's a classifier there that will tell you, that will rate the risk and impact of a particular remediation. Okay, and if that impact is too high or the risk is too high, often today you put a human in the loop. Now, as these get smarter, you hope that the workload on that human becomes less and less until finally you get enough confidence that you take the human out of the loop. But that's one of the important factors in actually building these systems, to have those safety measures and allow, in particular, our customers to apply them and get that level of comfort and make sure they have that level of certainty before they turn off that human in the loop.
How do you know you've gotten to that level of comfort?
Well, again, this is where the feedback is so important. So you grade yourself. So the feedback is constantly coming in. And if, again, it depends on impact. If you're rebooting a particular system, that's low impact. So a relatively low confidence level, historically looking at this, is 60 or 70% would be fine. If it's high impact, then you wait and you see you wait until you have a high level of confidence. That means historically, you look at historical data and you see if you're up at the 95% level before you would allow it to go.
So in a sense, the answer is you automate it.
So there's a lot of automation and layers of automation and loops of automation feeding back on themselves. What's the first step people have to take before any of the rest of this can work?
Well, I mean, to begin with, there's an old saying, you learn a lot by doing. So the first step is to choose a problem, okay? Like cell site, you monitor your cell sites, you look for specific cell site problems that are easy to identify and low risk to apply the remediation. And you just do it, right? And by doing that, you start putting your infrastructure in place, you start realizing how to build these systems. And you start building confidence in your team that you can tackle the problems. The most important thing, though, I think, to sell this is to make sure you have a measurable ROI. So, for example, we started with one client and they said, okay, we're going to just take the low-hanging fruits, things akinable to rebooting systems, okay, and we'll apply it to what's coming in. So if I make a mistake, there's no harm done. If I get it right, then that's good. And they were able, in a short period of time, in about 60 days, to reach a level of automation of 20%. Now, that's low-hanging fruit, but that was 20% less work that their team had to do. Or they put it this way, that gave their team 20% more time to focus on the real issues, the real difficult problems.
Are there any prerequisites to even starting to pick that low-hanging fruit? If that's the first active step you take towards automation, anything you need to do to set the stage for doing that?
Well, most companies already have set the stage for that, and that they have a lot of monitoring tools in place. They may have observability platforms, and by doing that, they have cleaned up the data and have what they have pretty clean signals coming into the fault signals coming in. So you can leverage that. Okay. Now the observability tools are still manual. People it's eyes on glass, so people are still looking. But you can sometimes take those data streams, or if those are not available, it takes more work. You go back to the telemetry data coming off the equipment itself. But you leverage those data streams and you get started with that.
Fantastic. Now, Charlotte, you indicated in your research that something called an intelligence architecture is required to support real network autonomy at level 4 and above. What do you mean by an intelligence architecture, and why do you have to have that in place in order to get to those higher levels of automation?
Yeah, I mean, it started off, I was interviewing some telcos, and one of them said, we were beginning to think we couldn't get to level 4. And then 18 months ago, the topic of agents kind of seemed to surface. But as soon as you start to think about agents and that sort of complexity, you're getting into some serious organization that you need in order to deploy a lot of machine learning and AI. So you need some sort of architecture, some sort of platform which has good design and it provides decent lifecycle management. And in future, there's going to need to be integration both inside and possibly outside of the company as well, because you're thinking about taking agents out into the ecosystem. And you need something that has all the good buzzwords: virtualized, open, modular, all of those sorts of things. And I think there's a few names floating around for this, and me and Dale have been backwards and forwards on this as to what exactly we're going to call it. And we have alighted on intelligence architecture because we were talking about obviously supporting a range of intelligence. I think people can automatically imagine what that is. However, I have seen Etsy using knowledge plane. I have seen cognitive terminology used. But anyway, for the moment, we're going with an intelligent architecture.
And what would the key components of this intelligence architecture be?
So I have, I count on my fingers 4 when I think about this. So I have four dimensions, main components. My first one is data, obviously. So that's the gathering, federation, transportation, and use of data for training models. And then, and I see, there's been discussion about exactly what that would look like. And I see data mesh as a potentially good solution. So, you're leaving the data in situ and then requesting it as needed. And then intelligence is my second one. So that's appropriate models to perform good quality decision making. And so the discussion in insurance, when we're talking about assurance, is, we're probably talking about root cause analysis and measurement against goals. It's those sorts of decision makings. And then knowledge, probably the newest in some way and the most interesting. So the federation organization of knowledge about whatever is needed. So network services, devices, and other elements. And this is all about the descriptions and their relationships between each other, very useful and necessary to stop bad things from happening with the intelligence. And then you've got agents. So as discussed, you've got simple agents, which are about decisioning and then getting a tool to solve the issue. And you've got multi-agents, which are more intelligence, distributed intelligence.
So basically, you said your 4 components at the moment, since you have, only 5 fingers to go with: data, intelligence, knowledge, and agents. But I'm like, damn, you still have a thumb. Does it, excuse me, does it make sense to incorporate something like wisdom, which is sort of historical knowledge in this? And I keep coming back to the whole value of time in all of this automation and all of these loops, because things look different in real time versus, in every second interval versus every minute interval versus, oh, yes, 58 hours ago we saw this and this connects to that. So I'm wondering if there's any, sort of in my mind, data, intelligence, knowledge kind of moves from, just the raw information to knowing what to do with it to this broader context. And then the agents are the things that act on it. I'm just wondering if there's one more thing in between knowledge and agents that's somehow wisdom. And
Well,
maybe go ahead.
I think there's sort of a twist on what you said is that there are actually agents out there that are building the knowledge base for you. So that you put in play and building up what you called wisdom, the long-term knowledge, what historically happened for this. And sometimes you have to take a longer view. You may fix the proximal problem, but there's a harder problem at bay. Like say, for example, the server keeps using too much memory, you can reboot it and it starts over again. But then 3 hours later, still it's using too much memory again. You have to continuously reboot it. So you have these agents in place. They're looking for those sorts of long-term trends, and they're building up the knowledge of that. You also have, the other thing that is often the case is that good diagnosis requires good topology information, and you can have sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. You have missing topology information, incorrect, stale, etc. So you have an agent there that is mining and looking at perhaps the incoming signals and correlating them together and seeing if that jives with the topology's own record and maybe improving it. Now, in any of these, because actually one of the most dangerous things you can do is refine knowledge incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
You can also have human reviewers to look at what these knowledge agents are doing before you apply it back to the knowledge base and it's shared among the other AIs.
I love your refining knowledge incorrectly, because what flashed into my mind was that old adage, it's not what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you know that ain't so that hurts you. And that is incredibly important on all of this.
Yeah, so you can have agents specializing on both sides of that, what you just said.
Right. Finding the information and then validating the information.
Validating, exactly.
Exactly. And one of the things I keep thinking about as you guys are talking, Dale, this has got to be a great deal of fun for you because your entire career has been focused on automation, distributed systems, figuring out how to bring all this together. And finally, we're at a stage where not only do we have the technology that Vitria is able to bring to the table, but also some of the problems that are worthy of the technology at scale.
Yeah.
What to what extent is the whole notion of distributed intelligent architectures kind of at a new peak here? What's new and novel and exciting, given that you've been doing this for many decades?
Well, I think actually what we just talked about was one of the most exciting aspects of it, in that people are starting to realize that it is the knowledge. People have, over the past 20 years, we've focused on data and better ways of and more scalable ways of processing data. Now it really has to be on intelligence and more scalable ways of processing, in enabling intelligence and also processing the knowledge or the data that intelligence needs, the metadata that intelligence needs. Okay, and you have to do that at scale. So I think that is a very exciting part of it. And it's happening. It's a fundamental change. It's uplifting of what we've done before.
So yeah, moving from data and intelligence to knowledge and wisdom at a scale is really
at scale.
At scale, yes. And Charlotte, I know you've talked about the sort of the pros and cons of hierarchical versus distributed intelligent architectures. What do you see as the way forward for most telcos today, and why?
Yeah, so the starting point, we don't have enough technology to do anything very distributed at the moment. That's probably 4 or 5 years down the line. She says with her fingers crossed because things do move really quick.
But all 5 of them, or all 4, or just 4?
All 4 of them. I'm saving the 5th one for something else. So we've got mostly centralized hierarchical architectures in place, where you put one, you have one particular problem and you set up a hierarchical agent at the top to deal with that, and then you have its brother next door, which will say, deals with a different format of that problem, but then very, very interesting. So this last week, I have just been finishing some research, and it's taken me months to get right, and I'm just coming up to the end. And blow me down if the Chinese don't come up with this new small model DeepSeek.
And you
suddenly
just
I'm like, oh my goodness. Yeah. It's like, could they not have waited another few weeks until I published? But suddenly, where one would have said, well, a distributed architecture is going to be difficult because you've got all of these sustainability issues, you've got return on investment issues. Large language models aren't really capable of doing things without hallucinating and all of this. Suddenly you have, this potentially cheaper small model which you could start to do agent things with. I think there's still an argument about the true cost of training. I have seen people disputing that it really costs 16 million and more like 1.2 billion or something because of what's actually going on in the background. However, it shows a bunch of new techniques for training models which are suddenly moving forward. So you have these small models which may well be usable in a much shorter time frame for agents.
And I have to say that this is a very contextual definition of small model because we are still talking about multiple billions of parameters.
Yeah, indeed. And very interesting question. How big a model do you need to deal with most telco problems if they're using fairly structured data and so forth? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, and back on the question of how much is too much, you mentioned that things are still largely centralized and not very distributed. What is very distributed in your world?
Oh my goodness! Well, theoretically, you could give each agent a small language model for them to power them. That small language model would allow it to know where it was and to know about the data and what is going on around it. It would then you might then also have some top level models. So, for example, in assurance, as soon as you want to assure a service, you can't have one model in one domain. It's got to go across the domains. So you start to get all sorts of exciting, and they're very academic discussions at the moment. What happens if you have a bunch of agents and they are all operating independently, but they start to the behavior starts to go off in various directions. It's not entirely certain what that will be. So we are talking about potentially quite a lot of complexity, possibly sorted out by having another bank of models at the top that do control and other activities to stop bad things from happening. But we are talking about a lot of intelligence to get this sorted.
But I think one thing is that it doesn't always require a language model. We still have very good techniques. If you do anomaly detection, for example, there's been signal processing algorithms and AIs around for 30, 40 years. They do a great job of that, and you can think of your intelligence as being also federated and distributed, sort of like it is in the body.
Exactly. Okay? Yeah.
I don't have to think about breathing. So you have things that are just autonomic for that. And then you have other ones that, processing in the eye. A lot of the processing of visual, it takes place in the eye itself before it is sent upstream to the brain for that. And so you're going to have these layers of different levels of AI. And so we shouldn't rush out to think there's one big LLM that we're going to put in place, or it's all going to be LLMs. It's going to be a hierarchy of intelligence and hierarchy of AI capability in that. So I think that is one important point that we should concern ourselves about. But the other thing is that we have to progress the governance of this along with, in the same rate that we're applying this. That's why we certainly should apply these models, but then we should go back and make sure something is checking these models before we just randomly implement what they're directing you to do. So there's going to be a whole set of governance processes that need to be put in place that's continuously monitoring this and raising their hands or putting a stop to things that they think is inappropriate or bad behavior.
Now, this
so we
governance...
need automation assurance.
That's right.
Yes, automation assurance.
How deep do we stack the turtles on that? That's always my question.
Well, yeah, that we'll learn by doing, to be honest. We don't know, but it goes hand in hand with that.
And have you seen any of your clients put in place a governance that you would consider best practice, without naming names? Like, what are some of the things you've seen? Like, that's a really good idea, and most of you should be doing that.
Right. Well, no, I think we're starting to put it in place. I mean, but the industry, I think the worldwide is struggling with this particular problem. But I think it is the main thing is the use of AI when large language models can be used, how isolated they are in the environment, whether they can be connected to the network at large or not, as well as that there has to be some human in the loop for what you would consider dangerous behavior for a certain amount of time before you allow it to, before you allow the automation, for example, to actually be put in place.
So it sounds like what you're saying as a first step in building out the governance is actually figuring out what dangerous behavior is, like classifying this is bad enough that you want to have a human in it for at least a period of time until you reach that 95% confidence level. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And only allow certain sorts of actions to be taken. And so and that's also limited by your automation too. If they want to take an action, then if there's not an automation there already in place to support that, then that action necessarily typically has to go through a human or through another system, which may not be an AI system or a very dumb AI system that's more reflexive than active.
That sounds like a piece of analysis and, in a sense, inventorying that many organizations may not have done yet, because it's going through everything, all the list of all possible actions that can be taken and kind of flagging the ones that need some degree of oversight and then associating that degree, those actions with the appropriate degree of oversight, whether it's another non-AI system, a human, both, or neither. So that does sound like one recommended best practice, governance practice that you can suggest to our listeners. So that's interesting.
And as a starting point, they'll probably be able to refer back to their existing change management processes. What kinds of things have to go through what levels of approval in order to be enacted, which speaks to what I was going to say before, which is the folks who are reviewing these potential actions for their level of danger and reviewing the ongoing activity of the agents as they start to operate in the environment. Those are pretty high-level people, it sounds like.
Yes, they are. For that, I mean, they're experienced people in that sense because they know the ropes. They've seen this before. Yeah. Now, once you get an AI reviewing the other AI, then the question would be, what do you layer on top of that to make sure they're not conspiring against you?
I guess we've wandered a long way from something that you said early on, which was about ROI and anchoring your initial proposals to do these things in your environment in a direct ROI. So what do you see as the key business value in developing this whole intelligence architecture and layered approach to network autonomic operation?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest benefit is it allows us to continue to build more and more complex systems, because the systems are getting so complex enough that human operators struggle to be able to keep up with them. So if you want to continue to evolve the complexity of the network, and if you look at 6G, the networks are going to become much more complex than they are today. A lot more real-time things happening on it. And there's going to be a lot more control and automation, which is scary, as we have to see. It has to be governed, as we just talked about. Okay. So I think that's the biggest benefits for this. If you keep things componentized, if you keep things validated, then I think this is absolutely doable, though.
I love that your answer is not you save money, you can lay off people, but you can address harder problems.
Yeah.
And that to me is, that's the highlight of a truly disruptive solution. So that's good to hear.
I would add in a little extra piece. So I look at the financial value for all of this sort of thing. And somebody asked me to calculate the difference between level 1, 2, and 3 and level 4, 5 in terms of financial value. And it was a vendor who shall remain unnamed. And I said, look, I think about 2/3 of the value we were taking in level 1, 2, and 3. There isn't that much more to take in 4 and 5. And they were, but we can't say that because we want to sell more. We want to sell more automation. And I said, well, listen, look at my figures and you tell me where I'm going wrong. And they couldn't do it. So I think it's really interesting that and big questions as to where level 4, 5 goes in terms of what's worth doing, where is too much, and I think probably the answer will be somewhere around what happens with in general with AI and models and so forth, and we'll probably have to wait until the technology catches up and makes it cheap enough and easy enough to do some of these more complicated things.
And when the cost of doing it with software becomes significantly lower than the cost of doing it with people, who are getting scarcer as far as the inflowing generation of new techs who would be working their way up the expertise ladder in carriers. They, like everybody else in the industry, seem to be experiencing a bit of a demographic crunch right now. And so that will bend the arc towards automation to some extent as the resources that it compares to and competes with become scarcer and more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Although one does have to just do a little calculation in your head. If you've got 100 people in your NOC and SOC, and maybe you've gone down to 50, and you've got 50 left, and what's the savings on that? So you've got 50 at 100,000 full-time equivalent, something like that. You're not looking at an enormous amount of money, and theoretically, to get these automations working, it's if we can get them to work on something somebody's laptop, fine. But if we need NVIDIA to come in with, a stack of GPUs, we could be talking serious cash. So it's really interesting. I don't know quite what's going to happen, although I do think that the push in general across all verticals to go for AI will probably mean that things become doable over time.
Yep.
And I would just add, I want to circle back to what you are both saying in different words, which is it's not really about saving headcount. It's about doing stuff that was flat out impossible to do before. It's like saying, oh, how many people can an X-ray machine replace? Well, none, and a billion. You couldn't do that before. Now you can do it. That is tremendously valuable. How many people does the internet replace? Well, none and a trillion. And anything that's truly disruptive stops being measurable in headcount and is measurable in thing that was just flat out impossible before. And that's what I hear you both saying in different ways is we're not sure what those things are going to be. But once we get to the point where we can start doing them, we will begin to find out.
If we can find a way for the telcos to sell all of these things, then absolutely. When in my financial valuation, I get caught, and I never put too much in on the revenue side. But I absolutely agree. Especially agents are necessary if you want to manage power and devices and everything all together. Then you're going to need some sort of distributed system.
Yeah, and I think you're very wise not to get too caught up in that because it's not really possible to do an ROI on the what is now possible and was, But okay, well this is absolutely fantastic, guys. Thank you very much both of you for joining us today. Where can people find you? I know obviously they can hit the Vitria site at vitria.com. Dale, you have a blog there, right?
No, I don't, but Deborah maintains lots of blogs there.
Okay, so a good site to go is vitria.com/blog, and there's lots of good information there. Can people find you on LinkedIn? Is that a good place to go?
Absolutely.
Okay, so go find Dale on LinkedIn. And Charlotte, what about you? Where can people find you?
charlottepatrick.uk. I put on, every time I do some research, I put the summary on there. So there's plenty of stuff in my articles section.
And folks can download this white paper from Vitria called Journey to AI-Based Automation and Customer Experience Leadership. Start with the end in mind and read a little bit more about how some of these technologies can go to work in your organization. And with that, I think that is a wrap. Thank you again both for joining us.
Thank you, John and John. It was a lively discussion. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Likewise.
It was a pleasure.